Good evening, this is Goldie. It's Wednesday, May 25th, 2011. Remember, most importantly, I rant so you don't have to. If I don't have your email and you'd like to receive the script of each show, send me your email to my email address, which is goldyrant@gmail.com. People continue to ask me why I do this rant, and to be truly honest, I have to say I do this for my own sanity. If I did not, it would come out as a rage at inappropriate times and to the wrong people. It would happen at parties. Here's a brief summary of what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about what we can do when an activist Supreme Court decides a case that erodes civil liberties. I'm going to talk about the undeclared war in Libya. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I'm going to talk a little about how a study at Georgetown University has filled in a few blanks regarding lifetime earnings depending upon your college major, which I alluded to last week. I'm going to continue to show how the lynching, assassination, or extrajudicial execution of bin Laden is being followed up by messages from those actors that are benefiting from the assassination or the lynching. Thank you there, Indelicate Genius, for that word. It is a good one. I think it is more like a lynching than an assassination. I've been talking for at least a year about the structural regulatory defect that allows companies like BP to write their own regulations. I identified the problem through the BP oil gusher in the Gulf of Mexico, something that everyone witnessed and everyone had an opinion about. Briefly, I stated that since the Citizens United case decided by the Supreme Court, corporations and other groups were granted a free speech right in the form of unlimited campaign spending. This right translates into a disproportionate power to write the regulations that govern their various commons depleting activities, like oil leasing, mineral leasing, airwaves leasing, grazing, pollution spewing, etc. I find that the only way to get out of this quagmire would be to pass a constitutional amendment that would override any future legislation or Supreme Court to say that corporations are not people, and limit campaign spending to individuals only and to no more than $100 per person to be adjusted for inflation. To me, it was a huge breakthrough to identify the actual problem and then propose a solution, no matter how difficult it would be to pass an amendment. Interestingly, it took an event such as the BP oil gusher to get my mind to focus, and your minds as well, to the many rantees that participate in between rants and assist me in these endeavors. Over the past year, I've also spoken about the erosion of civil liberties and have brought up many, many examples, including surveillance cameras and data gathering, obviously made worse by the success of the bin Laden lynching. I never really came up with methods of impeding these erosions except educating people to the insecurity of these data gatherings and slippery slope arguments. So let's go to a case recently decided wrongly by the Supreme Court. This is a May 17, 2011 by David G. Savage, Washington Bureau of the Los Angeles Times. It's entitled, Supreme Court Gives Police Leeway in Home Searches. Quotes, officers may break in if they hear sounds and suspect that evidence is being destroyed, the justices say in an 8-1 decision. Justice Ginsburg dissents. Thank you. The Supreme Court gave police more leeway to break into homes or apartments in search of illegal drugs when they suspect the evidence otherwise might be destroyed. Ruling in a Kentucky case Monday, the justices said that officers who smell marijuana and loudly knock on the door may break in if they hear sounds that suggest the residents are scurrying to hide the drugs. I have to stop right there. How many times has a police officer said he smelled weed? I don't know the number. I am Mr. Anecdotal. It's almost all the time when they want to search. And it's unprovable. Back to the article. Residents who attempt to destroy evidence have only themselves to blame when police burst in, said Justice Samuel Alito Jr. for an 8-1 majority. In her dissent, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said she feared the ruling gave police an easy way to ignore Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable searches and seizures. She said the amendment's core requirement is that officers have probable cause and a search warrant before they break into a house. How secure do our homes remain if police, armed with no warrant, can pound on doors at will and forcibly enter, Ginsburg asked. An expert on criminal searches said the decision would encourage the police to undertake knock and talk raids. I'm surprised the Supreme Court would condone this, that if the police hear suspicious noises inside, they can break in. I'm even more surprised that nearly all of them went along, said John Wesley Hall, criminal defense lawyer in Little Rock, Arkansas. I'm not, by the way. In the past, the court has insisted that homes are special preserves. As Alito said, the Fourth Amendment has drawn a firm line at the entrance to the house. One exception to the search warrant rule involves an emergency, such as screams coming from a house. Police may also pursue a fleeing suspect who enters a residence. The Kentucky case began when police in Lexington sought to arrest a man who had sold crack cocaine to an informer. They followed the man to an apartment building but lost contact with him. They smelled marijuana coming from one apartment. Though it turned out not to be the apartment of their suspect, they pounded on the door, called police, and heard people moving inside. At this, the officers announced they were coming in and broke down the door. Instead of the original suspect, they found Hollis King smoking marijuana and arrested him. They also found powder cocaine. King was convicted of drug trafficking and sentenced to 11 years in prison. The Supreme Court ruled in Kentucky v. King that the officers' conduct was entirely lawful, and they were justified in breaking in to prevent the destruction of the evidence. When law enforcement officers who are not armed with a warrant knock on a door, they do no more than any private citizen may do, Alito wrote. The resident need not respond, he added, but the sounds of people moving and perhaps toilets being flushed could justify police entering without a warrant. The ruling was not a final loss for King. The justices said the Kentucky State Court should consider again whether police had faced an emergency situation in this case. All right. Are you kidding me? The sound of people moving and toilets flushed justify police entering without a warrant? All right. It smells like a bad case, and I'm going to assume it is a bad case for a moment. Actually, I don't need to assume, because this is another example of an activist, anti-civil liberty Supreme Court case. Instead of me calling for a constitutional amendment like I have done to fix the structural regulatory defect, this particular case, however, looks like it might be right for actual legislation. Maybe it could be led by Tea Partiers, the only inspired group out there. Since the Supreme Court has decided that flushing toilets is probable cause without a warrant, a simple fix could be a definition of probable cause in federal criminal law that would override any state law. When I spoke to my Houston friend who pointed out the case to me, I realized that a certain class in law school, criminal law, had all kinds of exceptions throughout it, based on prior decisions that were crap or shitty or whatever you want to call it. For example, in criminal law, statutory rape originally had a defense in it that if the girl told you she was over 17 or showed you ID that showed her over 17, you could bring up such fact in court. Over time, however, this exception was abused by rapists and could not be proven the way a rape kit can prove that there was a forcible rape. So statutory rape became a crime with no defenses, or a strict liability crime. Similarly, if we want to override this stupid decision, we could write into federal criminal law that the sounds of shuffling feet or the flushing of a toilet are not things that create an emergency situation for police without a warrant, which allows the police to violate the Fourth Amendment. This also leads us to the fact that there are situations where it does matter who we elect to the federal political level. And specifically in this case, supposed constitutional conservatives, libertarians, and or Tea Partiers could lead the charge to basically overturn this stupid judicial decision with legislation. Interestingly, this is an example of something that could be cured without requiring a constitutional amendment, because I'm always calling for that constitutional amendment to override the Citizens United case. Let's go back to something that is an incredible waste of time and money and solely benefits incumbents, and that is redistricting. Every 10 years, the Constitution requires redistricting. In Texas, by the way, it is done whenever the parties change who is in the majority in the legislature. Districting is actually the setting up of districts, congressional districts throughout the state, and letting you know how many representatives you have in the House of Representatives based on your population. If you think about it, this is one of the prongs of the constitutional amendment necessary to override the structural regulatory defect that plagues our commons and regulatory scheme. That is, there are no term limits for congressmen and senators. Since there are no term limits, these people are always raising money to run for re-election. And since they are always raising money, and the Supreme Court has deemed it legal for corporations and other groups to give unlimited sums to campaigns, these legislators want to stay in power and remain beholden to the groups that give them the money. They don't want to remain beholden. They are beholden to the groups. Let me give you the flavor of the battle that has been going on in Texas. This is from the Austin American Statesman, April 28, 2011. Just listen to how stupid this is. Sharp lines drawn in redistricting map battle. This is by Alberto Martinez. I recognize that some members are not going to be pleased with the results of the map, Representative Bert Solomon says of his redistricting map, which some of his peers in the House examined Wednesday. The Texas House spent hours Wednesday, and this is April 27, 2011, battling over a redistricting bill that would redraw the boundaries of the lawmakers' districts. The once-a-decade effort is always contentious. Lawmakers resist redrawn districts that would pit them against each other or bring tough re-election bids, and allegations of bias and partisanship abound. Because bias and partisanship are all that it's about. The author of the bill, House Redistricting Committee Chairman Bert Solomon, Republican of Carrollton, noted that the debate over his proposed map of House districts is inherently personal. I recognize that some members are not going to be pleased with the results of the map, he said. The debate over the bill, which had drawn about dozens proposed amendments, was expected to go late into the night. The Democratic minority in the GOP-dominated House attempted to derail the bill with procedural issues, but they don't even have enough votes. And they don't have a filibuster right as well. Representative Eddie Rodriguez, Democrat of Austin, said there were three kinds of amendments proposed Wednesday. There are the ones that make minor adjustments, the ones that seek to create districts with greater minority representation, and the ones designed by unhappy members who don't want to see their districts chopped up. Some Republican members and activists say the proposed map would leave too many GOP members running against each other. But House leaders say they can only do so much given the constraints of federal voting laws and shifts in population away from conservative rural areas and towards suburbs that have seen explosive and diverse growth. Democrats are demanding greater representation for Hispanic and African American residents to better reflect the makeup of the state. Census figures, the release of which triggers the redrawing of the legislative and congressional maps every 10 years, show that most of the growth in Texas has come in minority communities. Rodriguez said at least 5 more Hispanic seats would be more appropriate. As far as the map that the House was debating, the implications for Travis County would be minimal, Rodriguez said. Solomon had asked for input from Rodriguez and the Travis delegation in drawing the map earlier in the session. In Travis, we worked well together, Rodriguez said. The map would likely leave the county split among 1 Republican House member and 5 Democrats. District 47 in southwest Travis County, held by Representative Paul Workman, the delegation's only Republican, would get a seat that is fairly safe for the GOP. Would get a seat that is fairly safe for the GOP. But not every Travis County member agreed with Rodriguez. Representative Mark Strom, a Democrat of Austin, has removed himself from the process. I think we have an inherent conflict of interest, especially in the session with the budget crisis we face, he said. The process has brought already substantial horse trading, arguing, and deal-making, Strom has said. Now, let me tell you about that. He has no power, so withdrawing from the process means nothing. Promise. Representative Jason Isaac, Republican from Dripping Springs, said Solomon's map will work just fine for him. His District 45 would span all of Hayes and Blanco counties and lose Caldwell County. Representative Charles Schwertner, Republican of Georgetown, said the House map is acceptable for him too. He'll get more rural and represent Burnett and Milam counties, part of rural Williamson County and Georgetown. Representative Larry Gonzalez, Republican of Round Rock, also said he feels good about the map that he helped draw. The district he now lives in would include all of Round Rock, Taylor, and Hutto. Red, red, red. Williamson County would get a 3rd seat anchored in Cedar Park. It would not include an incumbent. Wow. Even once the House signs off on a map, the effort is far from over. The Senate needs to take up the matter, and even then, most members expect the courts to get involved before the district lines will be official. Why is Austin, I have to ask, split into 5 parts? It's the 3rd largest city, 4th largest city in Texas. It's clearly to limit the power of the Democrats in that city. What a waste of our time and money, taxpayer money, solely to benefit incumbents. Quite the opposite of representing the constituents. So, we need to add term limits to the constitutional amendment that I'm proposing that would strip corporations of free speech rights, limit campaign contributions to $100 per human being, including using your own money for your own campaign, and no revolving door for any government official that leaves government service to a company that is regulated by the government, eliminating the ability of Senator Cornyn or Dick Cheney from going to work for Exxon or Halliburton after leaving government service, creating a class of true citizen politicians, beholden to no one. So if we were to pass a constitutional amendment that creates term limits for these guys, they would not be in there over and over and over again, and always raising money, always having to raise money, and having to deal with this redistricting. Now, this doesn't mean that they wouldn't fight for redistricting to help their party. They still would. But it wouldn't be the same thing as you trying to protect yourself and your own incumbency and your own job with Halliburton when you get back into private practice. All right, back to the undeclared war on the 1.8 million barrel per day producer, Libya. This particular imperialistic conflict shall continue as an election message to show that Obama is strong in the world and in supporting our, meaning our oil companies' interests. Also to reiterate, I'm still enraged at anti-war Democrats for being okay with killing Libyan babies, since it is their man doing it. F you, any of you people that fall into that category, and I will meet you anytime, anywhere to discuss this point in person. Just because Obama kills these babies, it's okay. It still pisses me off. All right, that was a little strong. There was an article in the Austin American-Statesman dated May 25th, 2011, entitled, "Libyans robbed our own bank to fund uprising," Rebel says. The article details how the rebels, message word by the way, needed and need money to fund their arms purchases from us. Here's a telling quote about the hypocrisy that is floating like turds in a punch bowl. U.S. officials have sidestepped questions about the legality of the rebels' decision to help themselves to state funds. They broke into a Libyan bank. One banking specialist said that's probably because the legitimacy of Gaddafi's government is in question after its deadly crackdown on Libya's own citizens. It's not the same as narco-traffickers stealing from the Federal Reserve. That would be criminal, said John Burns, a banking expert and executive vice president of the Association of Certified Anti-Money Laundering Specialists. These are rebels operating against a regime that we oppose, fighting for their people. Ali Tarhouni, the U.S. educated finance minister for the rebels, who until earlier this year was a low-key economics lecturer at the University of Washington in Seattle, said the bank heist is an illustration of the rebels' ingenuity. It's proof, he said, that they are ready to run Libya. Let me say that again. Proof that they are ready to run Libya by breaking into a bank. How appropriate. And really, how American. We've chosen this particular country and these particular former leaders to be tried for crimes against humanity. We are saying, this is so cool how they broke into their own bank and are stealing funds. Who are they anyway? Who are the rebels? Who are these people? All I know is that we are protecting this 1.8 million barrels per day. That's all we're doing there. We're killing Libyan babies to do it. So Americans can put more fast food on their table for their diabetic kids. This is just ugly. And Democrats don't care. As I said before, when I was in the secure location, a friend of mine brought a friend up, talked to me. She was political. And I did that first thing about we're killing Libyan babies, and it's okay because Obama's doing it. And she goes, show me pictures of Libyan babies that are being killed. Well, now it's okay for this little group that we're calling rebels, potentially the new government. It's okay to just break into the banks. And what Gaddafi did to his own people, that's a crime against humanity. Now, what George Bush and Obama has done against his own people, that's not a crime against humanity. Torturing U.S. citizens, sending them overseas, that's not a crime against humanity. All right. Even though I said I wouldn't do it, I want to talk a little bit about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict since Barack Obama decided to make it an election message. And that's all it is. I promise. Yes, that's correct. It is as pure of an election message as any bin Laden assassination or lynching message. In fact, everything you hear between now and 2012 is election. The economy is in a shambles, and I mentioned a few months ago that everything we heard between that time in March and the 2012 election was an election message, and I'm right. We can break down the different opinions in this country into several camps about Israel and the Palestinians. If you're a Democrat, probably not Jewish, you like Obama's overture. If you're a Republican, this is the worst, stupidest foreign policy blunder of all time that only helps terrorists, meaning Hamas. And if you support it, you are a Jewish Israeli hater and a terrorist as well, out to destroy Israel. Jay Sekulow over at the American Center for Law and Justice, the ACLJ, is on this, has been on board on this for a long time. He's been on this anti-Obama tack for a while. He's purely a Republican. And on Tuesday, May 24th, 2011, Rush said the same thing as well, lining up behind the Israeli Prime Minister, Netanyahu. And Netanyahu, in an address to a joint session of Congress on Tuesday, bragged about the rights that the Arab citizens in Israel have in comparison to the non-rights that all of those Arabs have in all of those Arab Spring countries like Egypt, Tunisia, Yemen, Bahrain, Libya, and the terrorist country of Iran. A hell of a lot of messages are going on here. All right. I was sitting in a friend's house, and I kind of went through this thing. Let me do it. If we're going to actually solve the problem, we would need to identify the component parts, kind of like treating it like a complex real estate transaction, with a bunch of moving parts and unknowns. I was sitting in a friend's house last weekend when I quickly went over the points that need to be negotiated. Property lines, boundaries, water rights, mineral rights, existing encroachments, settlements, security concerns, visas, and loan availability. Also included in this list would be the amount of civil liberties that the Palestinians would be willing to give up in order to get a visa to work in Israel. What type of full body cavity TSA-like searches would be required to cross the border? I mean, we have dogs in the airports, both drug and bomb dogs. So we have a pretty good starting list of things to negotiate. And I'm positive that I've missed plenty. All I'm trying to do is just come up with a list. I was watching Fox today, and a blurb floated across the bottom of the screen that said that Abbas, the Palestinian leader, said that there were no new initiatives in anything that has been said by both the U.S. and Israel that would create a basis to negotiate upon. So we have one party that does not want to negotiate, probably two. And the key to negotiation is that both parties want a deal. If both parties want a deal, I could negotiate it. I'm not sure that they want a deal, either party. It's like when you hear, we can't go back to the 1967 boundaries. They did it first. They started it. They hit me. It's like two kids in the back seat. Who hit who first? If you want to cure the problem, you can do it. If you don't want to cure the problem and have a two-state solution, you'll be hearing stuff like this. And that's possibly what we're looking at right now. Now, again, this was a election message. And with election messages, sometimes you get what I call the placebo effect. The placebo effect is whenever you hear about these studies for whatever, for new chemo or whatever else, they give a placebo to a control group. It turns out 7%, 10%, 20% of the people on the placebo get better. It's the placebo effect. And if the placebo works, the placebo works. Sometimes somebody might bring up an election message, and that might actually get things moving. I don't believe it will this time, because the Republicans are steadfast against this deal, because Obama proposed it, and they're all running for re-election. They're trying to get their Republican candidate elected. So, something to watch. It's interesting. If you want to negotiate it, I'll help. Can't be that hard. It's property lines. Who's in the settlements? Who's going to pay these people back if those settlements go to the Palestinians? By the way, no one is entitled to the status quo. You bought a house that was in an old Palestinian territory somewhere near a border, you are at risk. You're in the United States and you're not in Texas, and you're not in one of the states that doesn't allow eminent domain, the government can come and take your property. You're in Connecticut, government can come and take your property. No one is entitled to the status quo, whether in the U.S., unless the states have passed the law, like they did in Texas, or in Israel. All right, back to education. There was an editorial last month in the Austin American-Statesman dated April 26, 2011, entitled, "Is There a Degree of Value at Bargain Rates?" All right, this is an editorial that followed a Rick Perry pronouncement. Until we find substantial evidence to the contrary, we remain firm believers in the time-tested theory that you get what you pay for. It is from that approach we join others in harboring skepticism about the value of a $10,000 college degree, even if such a thing could be created. Nevertheless, we offer our sincerest good wishes to the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, which today gets to work on Governor Rick Perry's challenge to have low-cost college education available on some state university campuses. Today, Perry said in his February 8th State of the State address, "I'm challenging our institutions of higher education to develop bachelor degrees that cost no more than $10,000, including textbooks." What it should say is that costs no more than $10,000 to the student, because it costs well more than $10,000. It costs a lot of taxpayer funds. Back to the article. We're all for it, assuming such a greatly reduced cost college degree would not represent a greatly reduced college education. Back in February, Texas A&M University System Chancellor Mike McKinney, a longtime Perry friend and former chief of staff for the governor, told the legislative committee he had no idea whether the governor's challenge could be met. "I'm not going to say that it can't be done," McKinney said, declining to say it could be done. Raymond Paredes, Texas Higher Education Commissioner, questioned by the Austin American-Statesman's Ralph Horowitz, said he did not know if a $10,000 degree is practical reality or not. "I interpret the governor's remarks as a call to be creative and find solutions to the spiraling cost of higher education," he told Horowitz. In a letter, Perry urged state university regents to develop $10,000 degree programs sufficiently attractive so that 10% of degrees awarded are at that price point. So that means other students need to pay for it and taxpayers. He suggested expanded use of online courses, credit for prior learning, and other techniques. The goal is worthy. The numbers, however, are daunting. Right now, tuition fees and books for 4 years cost an average of $31,696 at our state universities. To the student! Higher Education Coordinating Board figures show that Sul Ross State University's Rio Grande College, with courses in Del Rio, Eagle Pass, and Uvalde, at $17,532, has the lowest price 4-year degree among state universities. To the student! There are 3 community colleges offering special programs that award bachelor's degrees in applied technology at costs ranging from about $12,000 to $15,000 for tuition and books. That's close to $10,000, but above Perry's goal. Shirley Reed, president of South Texas College, one of the 3 that offer the low-cost 4-year degree, told Horowitz that her McAllen school probably could get the cost down to $10,000 per student, but there's no free lunch. Am I the only one that sees this stuff? Seriously. One option is to reduce the number of hours in degree programs, but will the students actually have the competencies that the employer is looking for, Reed asked. Very important question. We'll talk about it soon. Precisely the question the Higher Education Coordinating Board must address in reacting to Perry's challenge. And while the board is at work on that task, we urge Texas lawmakers still struggling with spending cuts needed to balance the 2012-2013 budget without raising taxes to be careful to do as little harm as possible to programs that help make college more affordable. The budget battle rages on and numbers might change, but there seems to be a good chance that far less money will be available for these vital programs, and that's true. The legislature just finished. On a related front, the House and Senate have approved in differing versions a measure that would make a major change in the Texas Grants program that has helped thousands of lower-income students attend college. Under Senate Bill 28, the program, now operating on a first-come, first-served basis, would be revised to favor higher-performing high school students. The program has fallen short in that half the students awarded grants do not graduate within 6 years. Texans, generous by nature, would like to offer such grants to every high school student who needs one to go to college. But in these times of reduced resources, bill sponsor Senator Judith Zaffirini, Democrat of Laredo, properly is trying to make sure the available dollars are used as efficiently as possible. I mean, Texans, generous by nature, would like to offer such grants to every high school student who needs one to go to college. I hate to say it, but I'm not one of those people. Arguably, creating $10,000 college degrees also could be a cost-efficient thing to do. But let's remember that cheap is not synonymous with value. That editorial, that's the end of the editorial. As usual, the Statesman editorial board mixes it up in even discussing this issue. They ask, is this the type of education that employers are looking for? Well, what about that old idea that a college education is supposed to create an atmosphere of critical thinking? Also, when we see this type of mandate, it's not really a mandate, it's a suggestion by a presidential candidate, we should take this with a grain of salt. Additionally, I have to ask, why am I paying for your kids to have a $10,000 public college education? Seriously, you have to answer that question. I ran into a friend of mine this past weekend, and she has 2 kids. I re-mentioned my rhetorical statement that we should abolish all public education in order to get her blood boiling. Well, it did. She talked about how over history man is a social animal, used to living in communities where everyone participates, basically giving me the "it's your duty to educate my kids" argument. I even gave her the octuplet argument. She said, yeah, you got to pay for all of us. By the way, I hate that argument, since all I need to do is say that if we came from a community-based order, then her kids should do a mandatory 4 years of military service as their duty to the community. That's in return for what I give them. End of argument. That's why I don't like that argument. I prefer the "what are we going to do with all these kids" argument, which I use. I like that one instead. It gets us to start looking at what we want the country to look like in 20 years. What jobs will be available? And what should we train our kids for? Anyway, we did not get there. In any event, last week, I pointed out a study in the April issue of Tierra Grande, where they had a chart that showed increasing densities in cities leads to increasing levels of education and increasing wages. I mentioned that I thought a major defect of the study was that it did not include the cost of the education required to generate that extra $10,000 of income over a lifetime. There was an article in today's Austin American-Statesman called "Study Looks at a Lifetime of Earnings After College. Is the cost of a degree worth it? That might depend on your major," close quotes. College students' choice of major can mean the difference between median earnings of $120,000 for petroleum engineering and $29,000 for counseling psychology, a study by Georgetown University showed. Close quotes. You may recall that I have responded in the past to those critics of mine regarding just getting an education as a way to increase critical thinking. My response has been and remains that if the computers go down in Walmart, there are no people in there that can multiply the sales price times the 0.0825 sales tax rate. Additionally, very few young people can discern between fact and opinion, one of the major nodes of critical thinking. So at least here is a study that gives a major correlation to your choice of major and your lifetime income. It is starting the discussion, but it still fails to add that last critical component, and that is your lifetime financial statement, and whether it is worth the $200,000 to go to SMU to get your petroleum engineering degree, or whether it is worth going to ACC for a psychology degree. A total net worth analysis. Also, I have to ask, why aren't the parents doing this type of critical thinking training at home? It would certainly be cheaper to the society, and then we could focus on training the children for the jobs that are and will be available in the future. A much easier thing to do versus allowing kids to get a $10,000 college education and allowing them to major in English. Also, a special note of thanks to my Houston buddy who sent in a response before I ranted today. He wants to also look at the cost of the petroleum engineer to the destruction of the commons. Actually, just talking about the oil industry. I like it, because what it means is that we need to look at the continuing cost to society of having that petroleum engineer helping to decimate the commons, without the true cost of such decimation being included in a reduction of his salary. In other words, we the people are subsidizing his $120,000 per year. Nice catch, Scooter. In a clearer way, Oil companies are decimating the commons. They get subsidized leases. We pay for it. They do not have to clean up their problems. We do. That's how that guy makes $120,000 per year. If the oil companies actually had to pay the cost of their destruction and the cost of the things that they do and the cost of the extra health care that is caused, he would not be making the $120,000 per year. It's a side issue, but it's a good idea. All right. I talked with a friend of mine from the Northeast this morning, and he related that I was correct when I said that Governor Rick Perry of Texas is in the race for president. I actually did not say that. I said that he was preparing for a presidential run, and that if he ran, he would win. In other words, his handlers would not allow him to run this cycle unless he could win, which also means that he will not get into any primaries unless he is really running. He will not quit the governorship like Palin did. He was on Greta on Fox last night, and apparently she was completely fluffing him and his Texas miracle, which includes the 8th lowest spending per pupil in the nation and the greatest number of uninsured children in the country. What a miracle. And talking about the Texas miracle, there was a photo op in the Austin American-Statesman today that shows Rick Perry signing into law the anti-abortion Texas measure that requires women to get a sonogram at their own expense at least 24 hours prior to an abortion and to listen to a doctor about viability and what happens in the abortion to the fetus. What a Texas miracle. Women of America who care about your right to choose, I implore you to go out to the polls. I will support you, but you must lead. Remember that I said that gay marriage was dead as a wedge issue? Abortion is the social conservative issue of 2012. I have to again point out that the huge hypocrisy in this battle is that most Republicans that support anti-abortion measures due to the sanctity of life support capital punishment. Either life is sacred or it isn't. Continuing on about the lynching of Osama bin Laden. You may remember that I said a few weeks ago that I believe that the lynching was the worst possible thing that could have happened for the Patriot Act, surveillance, data gathering, torture, Gitmo, defense spending, and the war on terror. What I will be doing in the coming weeks and months is pointing out examples of such worst thing that could have happened. May 18th, 2011, Austin American-Statesman. CIA flew stealth drones to keep watch on bin Laden in Pakistan, from the Washington Post. Quotes. The CIA employed sophisticated new stealth drone aircraft to fly dozens of secret missions deep into Pakistani airspace and monitor the compound where Osama bin Laden was killed, current and former U.S. officials said. The aircraft allowed the CIA to glide undetected beyond the boundaries that Pakistan has long imposed on other U.S. drones, including the Predators and Reapers that routinely carry out strikes against militants near the border with Afghanistan. That's where we kill all the civilians. The agency turned to the new aircraft because they needed to see more about what was going on than other surveillance platforms allowed. Close quotes. Excellent. So we now need a bunch of these new drones at millions of dollars apiece, produced and lobbied for by the defense industry in the U.S. By the way, there is a documentary that was produced 2.5 weeks after the lynching, appearing on the military channel, that truly details the Navy SEAL lynching of bin Laden called Killing Bin Laden. It is the single most painful piece of propaganda I have ever seen. I have to ask, why would we detail our intelligence capabilities to our enemies that have cable TV? You must watch it. It will sicken you. Look at the number of actors, and when I say actors, I mean entities. NSA, CIA, defense industry, Gitmo, torture, surveillance, Patriot Act, extraordinary renditions, not letting the guys go after they're found innocent. Judge Napolitano tonight talked about the Patriot Act. This week, certain portions are up for renewal. Senator Rand Paul, Republican, Kentucky, filibustered for 7 hours against the renewal of those certain portions yesterday. And Harry Reid, Democrat, has said that such amendments will not be debated. As I said, since the lynching of bin Laden, all parts of the Patriot Act would be renewed. The judge had Bob Barr on, one of the architects of the Patriot Act in 2001, and he is now completely against it. The judge asked Barr, what about the argument that some people use that says, I have nothing to hide, so why can't they search me, search my home, look at my bank records, surveil me, and listen to my conversations? Bob Barr had some answer. It was BS. Let me give you a little thought about the difference between a capital R right and a small r right. And this is the good argument. When you are asked the question, are you okay with roadblocks? Are you okay with being guilty until proven innocent? Are you okay with opening up your home to everyone? Are you okay with microwaves and heat detection equipment being checking every single home on the street? And you say, I'm okay with it, I say, you only have a small r right to say that. You do not have a capital R right to say that. So, this is the difference. Whenever you say it's okay for a governmental entity to impede and violate my civil liberties, you are actually saying that it's okay for that government to impede and erode my civil liberties. And you do not have the capital R right to say that. Yet they use your opinion when 54% of Americans say, I'm okay with you looking at my bank records, or whatever the number is. You don't have the capital R right to say that. In fact, when somebody asks you that question, you should tell them, I don't have the right to actually give you an answer. Because if my answer is yes, you can search me and everybody else, I'm then giving you permission to search that guy. And I don't have the capital R right to do that. That's how you answer those survey questions. I don't have the capital R right to answer that question. Because you are asking all the people when you ask that question. You're not just asking me, you're asking everyone that question. And I don't have the right to answer for everyone. I don't have the right to say the Constitution can be violated by you against him. And me saying that it's okay for you to violate the Constitution against me says that. It's okay for you to violate the Constitution against him. And I don't have that right. I'm going to send the judge an email on that, because I don't know why Bob Barr doesn't come up with that argument. It's a critical argument. I hear it all the time. Roadblocks are great. I'm not hiding anything. You can stop me. You can't say that. You don't have the right. You don't have the capital R right to say that. It's like saying, I give you the right to kill me. You cannot give that right away. All right, that's all there is today. I want to thank our sponsors, all of which support this form of conversation, but not necessarily the content. PianoByAngelo.com, Angelo Limbesi's, who teaches and plays keyboards all over Austin. ZetaDesign.com for all of your decorative painting needs. AustinAreaPlumbing.com for all of your Austin plumbing problems. www.ticoadventurelodge.com, a small hotel in Samara, Costa Rica. CNC Surf School in Samara at www.cncsurfsamara.webs.com. La Vela Latina, great sunset bar and restaurant in Samara. Ambar Tequila at www.santosspirits.com, an extremely smooth tequila. Smoother than 1800, I'll tell you that right now. Another cool 4-unit green hotel in Samara called The Logan at www.thelogansamara.com/Logan_home. And of course, The Delicate Genius in Houston, who is a platinum sponsor. And I also want to thank the Indelicate Genius for coming up with the word lynching of bin Laden. That is hers. Thanks for coming out.